Ms. Becky Kent, who is unfortunately dealing with a family death outside of the city. And to her, of course, we all send our deepest sympathies and condolences. To start off with the land acknowledgement, the Halifax Regional Municipality is located in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and traditional lands of the Mi'kmaq people. The municipality acknowledges the peace and friendship treaties signed in this territory and recognizes that we are all treaty people. Community announcements? None? The approval of the minutes. The minutes have actually been circulated in a couple of versions. There are some with respect to the last meeting and some with respect to the last in-camera meeting. Are there any questions about the minutes? And if not, is there a mover and a seconder to address them?
So Vice Chair, we'll just deal with the approval of the public minutes for
Yes.
August 7th, and we'll do the in-camera minutes later on in the meeting.
Perfect. Moved by Commissioner Smith and seconded by Commissioner O'Malley. Are there questions? Can I call the question? All in favor?
Aye.
Minutes are adopted. For the order of business, this has been set out for us, but I understand that there are a couple of changes with respect to agenda item 7.1 and agenda item 10.2.1. We can deal with the latter one when we get to it, but with respect to 7.1, off-duty and extra-duty employment policy, that matter is, I think, going to be deferred if there is any interest in doing that.
Yes, Chair. So my understanding, there's no additions or deletions, but we do have a couple of deferrals requested by staff. So the first one would be item 7.1, off-duty and extra-duty employment policy. And item 10.3.1, which is Commissioner Kent's summary of the 2024 Canadian Association of Police Governance Annual Conference. And both of those are being requested to be deferred to a future meeting of the board.
Motion to defer? Commissioner Blackburn, second by Commissioner Smith. All in favor?
Aye.
As a point of information with respect to Commissioner Kent's intentions to speak with respect to 10.3.1, that was with respect to the recent Canadian Association of Police Governance Annual Conference, which was held in Halifax. And only she and Commissioner Njoku attended that. I attended a little bit of it, but not sufficiently to be able to give the flavor of the discussions. So that will be an interesting presentation the next time around. Could we could we have a motion to adopt the agenda as amended with those deferrals? Commissioner Blackburn, seconded by Commissioner O'Malley. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion's carried. Is there any business arising out of the minutes? I don't think there is.
No.
Thank you. I will ask now if anybody has a conflict of interest to declare as a result of any remaining item on today's agenda. Hearing none, we'll proceed. Having deferred 7.1, we're now at section 8 of the agenda, correspondence.
Yes, Vice Chair, I can confirm that correspondence was circulated for item 8.3.1 and item 10.2.1.
And do the commissioners have that correspondence? And the correspondence for 8.3.1, that was expanded just recently today, as I understand it.
Yes, correct.
And 8.2 petitions, are there any petitions?
There's no petitions from the clerk's office.
8.3 presentations. We have Ms. Nancy Saunders who submitted materials. Ms. Saunders, if you would come up to the podium, please. Ms. Saunders, with respect to public presentations like yours, there are a couple of capstones, if you don't mind. The presentation should relate to police services, policies and strategies, although not with respect to a single police event or series of events. And they should relate to the board's oversight mandate and not to day-to-day police operations. And the presentation should deal with the subject matter which affects the community as a whole, as opposed to a single individual. And it's not to relate to police conduct. Now, we've all had the benefit of reading your initial materials. Unfortunately, the latter materials came quite late in the day, especially for my day, and I've only had an opportunity to glean them. So normally presentations can take up to 5 minutes and then allow for commissioners' questions. But because of the late presentation of your materials, if you'd like to take a few more minutes, nobody will be offended by that. And if I may, as an introduction, I understand your background. And although I'm not a parent, I can only imagine what a heartache it must have been for you to go through with your child his difficulties, which ultimately ended in his death by his own hand. So you have our sympathies.
Thank you very much. My name is Nancy Saunders. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nancy Saunders, and I'm here with Heather Spidell.
Could you hold up for a minute until we get your microphone working?
Okay. Oh, it's on. Is that better?
No.
Yes, that's working. Okay.
That's much better. Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Nancy Saunders. I'm here with Heather Spidell. Thank you for giving us this opportunity to provide very important information. And we will be speaking about suicide in the next few minutes, so please take care. Heather and I are members of a group of moms who tried to get help for our children and loved ones when they were sick and unable to help themselves. We were repeatedly told, "We can't talk to you due to privacy laws. Your child has to call us themselves or give us consent to speak to you." We watched our children's health deteriorate. When they threatened self-harm or ran away, we called 911. Police officers in marked cars and uniforms arrived at our homes. Then they left, only to return again for another crisis on another day. Our children all died by suicide. We live with the guilt and the what-ifs every single day. We believe their deaths were very preventable if only the system had provided a much more personal, compassionate, and collaborative approach to caring for people in all stages of their mental health journey and with the families and caregivers who so desperately want to help them. The Nova Scotia moms who are working together to improve mental health services lost these children. Most of them were young adults, some were youth in their teens. In Nova Scotia, we lose 150 people a year to suicide. One suicide is too many. We have the highest rate in Atlantic Canada, and we have one of the highest rates here in Nova Scotia per capita in all of Canada. Sorry. The Nova Scotia moms who are working together are calling for a change in legislation and in attitudes. We made 4 recommendations to the Nova Scotia government in June of 2024. The first one was to amend the outdated privacy legislation regarding disclosure without consent following the example of Manitoba in 2018. We also ask for the introduction and promotion of the Nova Scotia Health Circle of Care and Circle of Support policy and forms advocated by Fred and Elizabeth Fountain in 2009, so that families can have these discussions with each other and with their doctors and care providers. To provide families and caregivers with support, education, and training in assisting their loved ones with mental illness and addictions, and also to provide trauma-informed training for all of those in the system who interact with those suffering from mental illness and addictions.
Thanks, Nancy. I must say I've never felt quite so safe and well protected as I do today here. My name's Heather, as Nancy said, and I guess I can just look at that. A lot of people think that we're talking, when we talk about changing the legislation so that caregivers and family members can be involved and communicating and exchanging vital information to keep our loved ones safe. It means opening up the door to all of the information. And that's not what we want. We're not asking for that. We understand privacy. We understand agency. So we are not asking for families and caregivers to have access to health records without the individuals, their children or their loved ones' consent. We're not asking for families and caregivers to know private conversations between clinicians and individuals. What we do want is for families and caregivers to be able to ask or escalate the urgency of healthcare requests for a loved one because they are more ill than they are letting on or even realize. We're asking and advocating for follow-up from healthcare providers when they're not responding to calls or requests for help, that sense of accountability. We're asking for the ability for families and caregivers to share family history and medical history, medications our loved ones are on, traumatizing events that may have happened in the family recently or a long time ago, impact of behaviors on families and the public, things like car accidents, speeding, violence that they've been exposed to, perhaps in schools. For a more thorough assessment, sharing and exchanging all that information for a thorough assessment, safety and treatment plan, and to know that this information is documented and considered in treatment and safety plans go forward. So that each time we're not starting from scratch, that there is a fluid and ongoing record of these important facts. We are also asking to know when our loved ones are taken to hospital and facility, if they're safe, what medications or treatments have been prescribed, how the family caregiver can support them at home when they're being discharged, and their safety plan. And we're also asking to know the potential side effects and behaviors to watch for, whether our loved ones should be driving and the consequences of interacting medications with alcohol or drugs when our loved ones are prescribed medications, new mood stabilizers and other forms of medication. Those are the things we are asking for. Right now, there's a barrier to that, and the barrier is like no other province in Canada. The barrier is what's called the Nova Scotia Personal Health Information Act, and it is clause 38(1) D, and it reads like this: the disclosure of personal health information in cases where a clinician. The only way a clinician can provide information to a family caregiver without their consent is if the disclosure of personal health information will avert or minimize an imminent and significant danger to the health or safety of any person or class of persons. What we have heard from doctors, clinicians, therapists, that word imminent means they have to make a decision in the moment with the information they have in front of them. It does not allow for any time to be able to make a full assessment based on all of that other information. So as a result, our loved ones are getting discharged from hospital when they are very sick. Nova Scotia mothers the group Nancy and I are with, have requested the following language to be changed through an amendment to the PL legislation. And that request is that the language now read, the disclosure of personal health information will prevent or lessen a risk of serious harm to the patient's health or safety or that of another person. That is very consistent with the province of Manitoba's change in 2019, where they removed the word immediate. Government leaders attempted to make this similar change in 2009, in 2016, and in 2018. They failed every time. Just for some perspective, and I appreciate the chair's reference to making sure that this relates to police on a global scale. And so some information here. North American research discusses how asking police to be mental health care providers perpetuates the long-held stigma that people with mental health issues are criminals or a risk to public safety. For our children and our families, the presence of police in marked vehicles and uniforms in our homes, in our driveways, escalated an already frightening and emotional situation. The presence of police in our driveways drew unwelcome attention and speculation to our homes and our families. The irony that we have legislation that protects privacy, our families' privacy was not protected. It was on full display. In some cases, police officers were put in precarious situations of going into our children, and by children I mean anywhere from age 10, when many of the mother's children started experiencing mental ill health, they were younger. And so going into their bedrooms, going into their private spaces alone, because without consent, the families were not allowed to go be with them. Not fair to the police, not fair to the families, not fair to the individual. The Nova Scotia Department of Health and Wellness on their website and in all of their material offers explicit advice to call 911 in the event of a mental health crisis. This means that HRM police have less time and resources to fulfill their mandate. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, to keep our community safe and risk eroding public trust in their role. This is universal. It's happening in the States, it's happening in Canada. There's lots of discussions about it. It's not unique to Nova Scotia. A couple of facts. In 2022, HRM police responded to 2,793 calls related to mental health distress and 755 calls for suicide attempts. Between January and October of 2023, HRM police completed 633 wellness check calls. These are the stats. So when a suicide happens, it gets classified as a suicide by the medical examiner's office. There could be other suicides that we're not aware of in this province if the medical examiner determines that they're a death by another cause. This is what we know of, and you can see how they spiked in 2020, right around, they spiked in 2021, which is right around COVID. And they've stayed extremely high for the last 3 years. You surprised to see that? And I will say, for every one person who dies by suicide, 10 people are deeply impacted. 120 more people are bereaved and grieving. Not everyone is able to provide consent. We've been talking with a lot of clinicians, a lot of psychiatrists and medical people here in Nova Scotia and across Canada. There is a lot of movement to educate the public about
Anaxagnosia.
Thank you, Nancy. Paranoia, psychosis. All of those medical illnesses can result in non-consent and withdrawal of consent. Essentially, when you're diagnosed with or experiencing paranoia, psychosis, you do not have the capacity to make decisions, and in some cases do not even think you're unwell. The system is so complex and overwhelming to navigate. It lacks empathy and skill. Families were read scripts, and they were asked to stay on phone calls for lengthy intake processes. Family and support people are prevented from advocating for their loved ones because legislation and attitudes position them as enemies rather than critical helpers. And that's certainly how all of the mothers felt every time they called and tried to get help. Suspicion. Complicated, time-consuming processes to confirm consent deter clinicians from even trying. So much paperwork to fill out to be able to override the privacy legislation. Prolonged illness, escalations, crisis, attempted suicides, and deaths by suicide have occurred as a result. And so we ask, how can we collaborate with you? And we thank you for the opportunity to share our experiences and our learnings with you. Some doors have closed, but yours was open, and we really, really appreciate that. These are the names of the moms who are part of our group, and there are many more who are silently behind us. Some of them can share their experience, and some can't because they're still in it, and they want to protect the privacy of their loved ones. Nancy Saunders, behind me, Heather, myself, Kelly Mitchell from Yarmouth, Michelle Hare, Lower Sackville, Laureen Rushton Truro, Luann Link, Barrington, Sheila Burke, Duncan's Cove. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Spedell. Could I ask you and Ms. Saunders a couple of questions? And the other commissioners may have questions as well. We all appreciate that these are very difficult circumstances that you have faced, and they're even difficult for you to talk about despite the passage of time, and we expect, quite frankly, that they'll always be difficult to talk about. And in terms of trying to find a solution, as I did some pretty quick mental arithmetic, I calculated that there are 8 calls a day that the HRP respond to for mental health crises, and almost 2 a day with respect to suicide attempts, or at least suicide ideation. Is that correct?
Don't know your sources, so we don't have those stats.
Okay, I just took your stats and
Yeah,
divided
those
them by the
stats-
number of days.
Those stats actually came from an HRM report. Yeah.
And in terms of what you think this commission could do from a policy perspective or a governance perspective, all things being equal and fair being fair, what would you like us to be able to do? What type of policy would you like to see us adopt? And what sort of governance model would you think would be of assistance to us in trying to wrestle through this discussion?
Well, I think one of the big issues is that you're filling some gaps for an issue that's really a medical issue. And I've read lots of articles and reports on the fact that, you are responding to a lot of mental health calls and such, that the province doesn't have the resources. They don't have, just from our own opinion, they don't have the proper compassionate kind of mental health urgent care that is actually needed. The mobile crisis team is often overburdened as well. So I think there's a huge gap in just the ability to provide compassionate care when there's a crisis.
One of our recommendations, and this might be, this is certainly something that would impact the police anywhere in Nova Scotia. One of our recommendations is that all first responders be trauma informed. So that by that, we mean that they would have official training in how to communicate with families and individuals who are in distress, and specifically in mental distress. What that looks like would be speaking in being able to validate, being able to diffuse difficult situations, being able to communicate and collaborate with families while also respecting the privacy of individuals. So one would be in The interim, before hopefully police are no longer responding to these calls, would be to have anyone who is responding to them from your force supported with trauma-informed training. My nephew is a police officer with HRM, and he says he spends 2 or 3 hours a day in the emergency department downtown, sitting with people in distress because they have to stay with them until they're admitted. And he has seen the tiny white-walled psych assessment rooms with the bolts and chains on the floor. And he knows what those look like, and that's where our children are going when they're in distress. So because of that, also providing support, if you already do, that's amazing. But if you're not supporting your police officers with what they're seeing, certainly there is no support provided to families after suicide happens, even if it happens in their home. There's no support, post-vention support to families. And I hope there is post-vention support for police officers.
Thank you. I'm going to ask the other commissioners if they have some questions for you. Commissioner Blackburn has a question.
Not so much of a question as just absolute gratitude for you being here today, having the courage to be here today. I have lived your journey in the mental health system with a stepdaughter who, graduated from the youth mental health system, but wasn't quite old enough for the adult system. And 15 years ago, I very easily could have been one of the Nova Scotia moms. We can't tell you that became a running joke in our household. And, my stepdaughter tried to hang herself in our garage, yet because she was of age, we had no rights to help guide her care and her treatment when she was able to access it. And I know in those times, you're not living as a family, you're just existing from crisis to crisis. And I do hope that you make this presentation, make arrangements to make this presentation to your local MLAs so that they can start enacting change at the provincial level. We need changes at that provincial level so that we don't have police officers spending entire 12-hour shifts sitting in emerge. And so I just wanted to thank you for your courage of coming forward today and ask that please make this presentation to your local MLAs as well. Thank you.
Thank you for
Mr.
sharing
Chair.
your story, Lisa.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner O'Malley has a question.
I wanted to just echo what Lisa said, and I'm very moved by your story. And what you're asking for seems so simple. It really does. And you commented that in several attempts prior to 2018, 2019 was the last time it failed. And I'm kind of curious, why did making such a legislative change like that why did it fail? Any insight you can offer us there?
Well, believe me, for the last 6 months, we have been doing everything that we can think of to meet with, present to, write letters to, educate all of the provincial MLAs and the leaders and senior staff. We've had several meetings with senior staff of all the relevant departments, my own MLA, Heather's MLA. We've published stories in the Chronicle Herald and Saltwire for 8 weeks in a row. We relived our horror on the front pages of a section of the Chronicle Herald for 8 weeks. And the reasons that we are hearing don't make any sense to us, especially when the rest of Canada has eliminated imminent and immediate from that statement for the exact same reasons we are saying it needs to be eliminated. So all I can say is we aren't giving up. We are continuing to work as hard as we can, and we do have growing support weekly from families and mothers and people who love their children who are ill and can't get them help. So we're not giving up, and we've worked really hard for the last 6 months. So we're hoping it does come to some good conclusion, but so far it hasn't. So I'm not sure why it's so difficult for the province to make this change. We really don't understand it.
Again, thank you, and I support you in your efforts
Thank
wholeheartedly.
you.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Malley. Ms. Saunders, Ms. Spidel, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much for giving us the time.
Yeah, we really appreciate it.
Thank you again to our speakers. Agenda item 9, information items. Are there any, Madam Clerk?
There's none to be brought forward to this meeting.
Thank you. Agenda item 10, staff reports. Other than from the chief and the chief superintendent, are there staff reports?
It would just be the independent civilian review 10.2.1.
I think what we'll do is we'll hear from the chief and from the
Yes,
chief
the chiefs go
superintendent before
first,
we
yeah.
move forward to that. Chief Superintendent, I think you played second fiddle last time, so would you like to lead off?
We flip a coin, we never know how it's going to go.
I've just flipped the coin.
Morning, Chair, through you to the board and folks in the audience. Let me also acknowledge the presentation that we heard and the support that families provide to folks suffering from mental illness. It's a very powerful presentation. I know it's a subject that is near and dear to the board and both police agencies. And so I think Chief McLean and I would also like to commend the mothers in the presentation for the stories that they share. Really, I only have 2 quick points to brief the board on today. The first one is our commanding officer that many of you know is preparing to make the Nova Scotia apology on behalf of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police to African Nova Scotia communities. That is scheduled for this weekend, and it will be held at the 1 p.m. at the North Preston Community Centre. And it will be live streamed from other locations as well. A number of folks from the Nova Scotia RCMP management team, as well as the Halifax Commission officers, will be in attendance for that event. There's been a great deal of work and sincerity by our commanding officer to that event, and it is a public event, and some of our police partners may be there also on occasion. By coincidence, I will not be there. I will be at the RCMP National Memorial in Regina, Saskatchewan for our fallen officers. And that is a historical once a year event that has particularly equally special meaning as we lost a cadet that was in training this year. So I will be sort of representing Halifax Detachment and knowing that other very senior officers will be supporting the Nova Scotia apology. But we continue to support the family of the cadet through the last 6 months. And in fact, there is a tree planting ceremony in honor of the cadet. And if the board would like further details for the date and the time, I believe it's September 27th, we will forward that information for distribution to the board. I thought I would just highlight one story about sometimes the events that happen, and for privacy reasons, I will be careful not to get too much into the circumstances. But on August the 23rd, and the Halifax Regional Detachment attended a call of a vehicle in the water of one of our lakes. That vehicle was a fully submerged SUV, approximately 150 feet away from the wharf, and the vehicle was submerged. By coincidence, one of the Halifax Regional Detachment members, as well as EHS and the fire department, et cetera, everybody was responding. But one of our members is a part-time dive member, and accessing some of the dive equipment that the member had, the member swam out to that submerged vehicle, and after multiple attempts was able to successfully extricate that person and help provide that care as that person was taken for critical care treatment in the hospital. You know, we often in this audience talk about the mistakes our members make, but they also do some extraordinarily heroic things. And just as this group needs to have the oversight on leaders like Don and I to do the best that we can to provide that right strategic governance and oversight of our people, it's also moments like this where we get to talk about somebody that ran into a building or swam out into a lake and basically did an underwater rescue and gave somebody a chance. Out of respect for the family, I won't get too many more into the details of the outcome of that, but it remains under investigation. So I just share that story with the group today. The final part is, I'm pleased to say, as some of you are aware, that we have our Oak Island Developmental Day, which is actually around employee wellness, is the major theme being put together for Oak Island. For the formal dinner that will happen that night, I'm pleased to say that Chief Ken Stubing is planning to be in attendance. Pleased to say Executive Director Bill Moore, Chief Don McLean will also be joining, as well as the guest speaker in the afternoon is His Worship Mayor Savage, and the guest speaker for the dinner is retired Assistant Commissioner Alphonse McNeil. I realized that one of the standing items that the board wanted the police chiefs to talk about was PWC, but it's a small but tangible example how every day, parties are working together for the betterment and safety of folks in Halifax. Vice Chair, that will be my presentation for today, pending any questions.
Chief Superintendent, thanks very much for that. And I'm glad, quite frankly, Chief Superintendent, that you highlighted the rescue. The thing you didn't add, but which we all understand interstitially, is that that member put her or his life in danger in making that rescue. And later on today, we will be discussing the independent review report, which does contain some critical elements. That's just a fact, and we will deal with those in the fullness of time. Some of them today, but in the fullness of time. But against that important backdrop, there is the story that you told, and I'm grateful for you telling it. Any questions from any of the commissioners? Thank you. Chief McLean, and if I'm not mistaken, this is your first meeting as what I'll call the real chief.
No, actually, I think the last meeting was, but I was still the whatever chief on the board.
Yeah, yes. Well,
It's the first one with the real name tag.
we like the name tag, and we're delighted to have you as the real chief once again. And if you want to kick it off, please go ahead.
It's like the real superstars of the real chief. So good afternoon, everyone. Chair Giles, members of the board, and everyone else is joining us today. And I'll just quickly as well, I don't want to belabor, but obviously to Nancy and Heather who came forward to speak on a courageous topic. And it's one that, the reality is it affects all of us, usually personally in some way or another. So I just want to, again, thank them for coming forward to share in their story. Let me begin by taking a moment to thank everyone who was involved in the planning of the 119th Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police annual summit, and those who took the time to attend. So that's our civilian members, our sworn officers, including members of the RCMP, as Jeff said, who work seamlessly on a day-to-day basis, and our volunteers who it was truly a very successful event. There was well over 400 delegates. I spoke to many of them, also many who were at the police governance event that attended both. I can tell you that there was nothing but positive remarks for Halifax, for the conferences, and for the hospitality that they were shown and the time that they were here. We're certainly looking forward to next year's summit, which will be in Victoria. So my thanks to my thanks and all the best to the CACP and the Victoria planning team who had attended here and shadowed our planning team, and look forward to, again, a very successful conference. We also, along with the RCMP, working hand in hand, hosted the Federal Ministers Retreat just a few weeks ago in downtown Halifax. Well over 150 delegates from the sitting government. Again, a seamless event that took place that allowed for public protest and those that come with it. But certainly, I think, again, working in partnership with our RCMP partners, that it was, again, a very seamless and well-handled event. And next week, looking forward to going to Sydney to the Nova Scotia Chiefs of Police annual conference, which is being hosted by the Cape Breton Regional Police. And looking forward to the exciting itinerary and agenda that they have for that. From an investigative perspective, I want to just point out, and you may have seen it, that 2 additional people were charged last week in relation to the Al Marah homicide. If you remember, that was the one of the young man that was murdered at the Halifax Shopping Centre a few months back. A man and woman appeared in Halifax Provincial Court to face the charge of accessory after the fact to a homicide. Investigators are continuing to investigate and ask again anyone with information to come forward. Our thoughts remain with the family. The investigation into Africville continues diligently with the integrated CID team. I have no further update at this particular time, but I can tell you that they are working hard on that particular case. From a recruitment perspective, our 2025 class will begin actually in a few short weeks. I just got an email to speak to them actually in a few weeks, so I'm looking forward to that. We are down at the final assessment point. We're getting to the point now where we're offering cadets seats in the class. As I stated later, the new model that was approved by the board will allow our turnaround time for the next class to be very short to begin to get back up, which I think is a very positive step moving forward. But on that note, I also hired 2 EPOs, experienced police officers, last month. Yeah, it is last month. It is September now. It was right in the middle of the CACP. I had to come up from one of my presentations and swear them in. And as well, I'm swearing another handful of EPOs in a couple weeks that will join our police department. And so, again, I take the opportunity to point out to people, anyone who wants to join our organization, to go to our employment section of our website, and there's lots of opportunities. From a firearms perspective, we have seized or surrendered now 226 firearms for the year. There have been 14 shooting incidents within the HRP control area of HRM this year, although for some it may seem higher, but that is the reality. One is too many. From a traffic perspective, 789 summary offense tickets were issued. You may have seen, due to initiative with the community response officers in Bedford, they issued 150 speeding tickets and related tickets in the last week related to a community concern in Bedford. We look forward to continuing those type of initiatives going forward, because I think road safety obviously is very important. There were 15 charges laid for impaired operation of a motor vehicle, 5 suspensions issued. And as well, with school going back this week, obviously we ask everyone to be very diligent in their driving habits as our young folks start to go back, and our older folks start to go back to school, including my 7-year-old grandson. So that will be a focus of both our education and enforcement efforts over the next little bit. I do want to point out, from a community perspective, I've spoken about the Rainbow Internal Support Network before, a group of officers, and they came forward with a proposal to waive fees for those who were going through a gender change, in terms of, because there are fees related to fingerprinting and all the other stuff, which I readily accepted. I thank them for bringing that forward as an initiative that I probably wouldn't have thought of on my own. This also will apply to those who may have been through the residential school system and want to reclaim their names in terms of just little things about reducing barriers and fees around fingerprints in terms of people reclaiming their identity. And we have recognized that the cost to this could be a barrier. As well, September 14th will be the MAD Memorial, their candlelight vigil for victims of impaired driving in their candlelight service. I'll be honored again to speak at that in the afternoon. And as well, September 21st at Shearwater will be the 13th annual truck convoy for Special Olympics Nova Scotia, which is an event dear to my heart. They raise significant funds for Special Olympics Nova Scotia. And again, I look forward to being there along with all of our police partners in Nova Scotia that take on this very important task. And those are my comments for the board, Chair.
Thank you, Chief. A couple of things, if I may. First off, I was delighted to receive yesterday, as part of my package for today's meeting, the report from your public relations person indicating the 150 or 157, I guess it was, speeding tickets, which were handed out last week. As a person who commutes in Quimple Road and in Joseph Howe Drive, I can well understand the speeding epidemic that's taking place, and 150 tickets or more in the run of a week is going to really help on that. So good work. Thank you. We last time discussed very briefly Judge Wright's comments, which were largely negative about strip search protocols not being followed by some members of the department. And I was wondering if there was any kind of an update you can give us on that.
I have had the initial conversation with our staff. I believe from what I get, I believe our policy is quite solid in that regard. So I think the issue is not necessarily around the intention of the policy, but rather the skill of the policy, I guess, for lack of a better word. But again, that would be something we'll continue to follow.
Okay, thank you. Any other commissioners for the chief? Commissioner O'Malley, thank you.
Just a follow-up question to that one, just in general about policies. I mean, obviously officers go through significant training, but when it comes to the department's specific policies, how are they educated, and what sort of refreshment training is given to officers as it relates to specific policies of the organization?
To the commissioner, obviously we have a lot of policies.
Yeah.
If we were to spend time on every policy, we would do nothing else in terms of, obviously in terms of, so there's initial training, certainly through your initial training in terms of when you would be exposed to policies, and depending on what the specific policies are, because some are obviously used more than others. But anytime a policy is changed, added, there is a communications plan that goes out through it. We actually have our policy analyst here. Our policy, actually not analyst, our policy advisor. There you go. Advising is better than analyzing. So in terms of when policies are put forward, that there's usually a chief's directive that goes along with that, and also direction to the frontline NCOs to communicate that down, cascade it down to their membership. Obviously, depending on what the nature is and the complexities and that sort of thing, there may be require more, but that's the general manner in which it's handled.
And what happens when, you mentioned that you've been bringing in a lot of experienced hires, which is great. So obviously, strong foundations in policing in general, but when they come into your department and they, what sort of process do they go through to learn about all these processes?
Yeah, no, so there is
Policies,
so anyone we bring in, there's a 3-week period of indoctrination, I guess, for lack of a better word, of training in terms of over at the training section, in terms that will bring them up to speed for most things. Obviously not everything, because, but we would expect they would have the basic fundamentals that will come, with their own police training. But clearly we do certainly HRP specific training policy piece that's contained within that 3-week period over at the training section.
And just one final one. Is there anything in a code of conduct of some sort that would link an officer's obligations to be aware of all the department's policies? Is there a linkage of any sort that makes it an obligation for them to, ensure that, they spend the time to learn policies, new policies, changes and such?
Yeah, Although the code of conduct is one of the things that we swear people, it's a rather lengthy sort of
Yeah.
document in terms that speaks up. I'll certainly look back into that and get back to you.
Okay, thank you, Chief.
Anything else? Commissioner Blackburn? Thank you, Chief. There are three motions for the commissioners' consideration. They can be put up for the benefit of the public and for the benefit of those who are watching the meeting online, but I'll read them for the present purpose. One, I thought I'd read them and then ask for the motion.
Okay.
Yeah, sure. To request the Halifax Regional Police prepare a staff report to address the Halifax Independent Civilian Review's recommendations pertaining to the HRP. 2, to refer the Halifax Independent Civilian Review report to Regional Council and recommend that Regional Council request the CAO to prepare a staff report to review the Independent Civilian Review's recommendations pertaining to Halifax Regional Municipality, develop a plan and report back to Council. And 3, create a working group comprised of 3 board members, including the chair, to review the Halifax Independent Civilian Review's recommendations pertaining to the Board of Police Commissioners and to report back to the board. Before discussion, can I ask for a mover and seconder, please? Councillor Commissioner Blackburn moved. Commissioner Smith, second.
Thank you, Chair Giles. I know when you read the motions, you read it as corrected. I wanted to note that we had requested or suggested a friendly amendment to item number 1 to drop the words direct the Chief Administrative Officer. It should be direct the Halifax Regional Police. That aligns with the Act. Unfortunately, when we were preparing, the clerk's office was preparing this report, I think we just grabbed the language that's typically used for council reports where we're directing the Chief Administrative Officer to do something.
Thank you.
Just ask Lisa if that's a friendly amendment.
Commissioner Blackburn, is that a friendly amendment?
That is a friendly amendment. Yes.
Thank you. Questions or comments on the motions now that they've been moved and seconded?
Just an
Commissioner O'Malley?
observation in the language. I'm wondering if the first recommendation should be made similar to the language in the back end of the second motion, which is where it says, to prepare a report on the review and make recommendations pertaining to, an action plan and report back. I'm wondering if they should both be the same in terms of their language.
Commissioner Blackburn, I think that would be another friendly amendment.
If that is if that's copacetic with legal, that's fine by me.
Yeah, I think it's just an expansion of what's there already, so.
Consider it done.
Do you need me to make a motion for that amendment or?
We can change it. Yeah,
We'll just change it on the screen.
it's friendly, so. we won't do it.
Commissioner Smith?
Are we discussing like getting ready for the meeting?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you, Chair. So I'm wondering if before commissioners give their thoughts and opinions on the report, I'm wondering if Chief McLean and obviously Chief Superintendent, but do you have any observations or thoughts that you wanted to share about the report itself?
Obviously, it's a lengthy report. So I think that, taking direction from the board is important. And I think that, from my perspective, we know that, August 18th was a challenging day for everyone, not one that we don't want to see repeated. And I think one that we've taken significant steps in evolving our response to. And I say we, I mean the collective we, including the board at HRM. But I think, for me, I think my role is really, as the recommendation states, in terms of looking at those recommendations and providing input back as to what it is that can, again, make us do evolve and do even better and serve in the community.
Any other questions or discussions?
You don't have to speak if you don't want. Yeah, okay.
Can't help himself.
Yeah. All right, thanks, Chief Superintendent. So yeah, I don't have much to add at this point. Like, I'll give a general observation of the independent, but I think the independent review, but I think the motion that's in front of us today just allows for that full look at what has been encompassing in that itself. I guess the piece, I think it was important, one, that we did the independent review for the incident, and sadly it took this long to get to this point, but I think it's better late than never. There are some aspects of the report that we've heard from members of the public that they're concerned in terms of like consultation and inaccuracies, and maybe that's something that will be dealt with in the further details. I'm not sure, but I think that would be important to look at that feedback that we're getting from folks and make sure that if there are inaccuracies that could be dealt with. But overall, I think what's most interesting to me is the recommendations around what we're doing around the homelessness file. And in most cases, and this is my analysis of it, and I like to be corrected if it's not right. It seems that what was shared, that HRM is doing somewhat of a good job, considering there's some other aspects that we could be doing better. So with that, I think it's a pretty dense report. There's aspects of it that I would have liked to see more thought through, but overall it's important, and we won't be here as we move forward, because me and Councilor Blackburn, because by the time this comes back, it will be another commission, but we'll be watching very closely later on when this does come to hopefully give public correspondence if I have any feedback. Other than that, I thank you, Chair, for bringing this forward and giving us a chance to speak.
Commissioner Teka, your comments. I think it's important when you have a report that's 120 odd pages long that deals with an event which was in many of our lives some time ago, to look at it cross-sectionally, to try to extract from it what is really important and what the authors are really intending by their words. And we have to bear in mind that there are a number of different actors who are addressed within the report. There's the Halifax Regional Police, there's the Public Works people, there's leadership at the HRM generally, there's the Board of Police Commissioners. There are a variety of recommendations, some of which at first blush may, not necessarily will, but may require legislative change or reorientation and things like that. And I think that this close look at a cross-section report will be helpful in defining its purpose and helpful in defining its worth going forward, bearing in mind that Council has already considered and staff has already considered some of the issues that arose out of the event and have made significant improvements along the way without even waiting for the report to be issued. And that much is made clear by the authors. So those are my comments. Commissioner Blackburn?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I guess what I sort of want to drill down into now is the specifics of the process. So, and I'll look towards Kathy on this one so she can correct me. So the report is formally presented to us here at the Board of Police Commissioners today. We act upon it, and one of the things that we are asking is that this report be formally presented to Regional Council. Then Regional Council will make its decisions on recommendations contained within, and they will pick up that piece of the work. When it comes to the working group, I guess we can expect that there will be a delay in creating that group with the consideration of the municipal election coming up in October. So we're looking at probably new members of the Board of Police Commission being installed in November-ish, December-ish. So it's quite conceivably the new year before this working group will be populated and will be able to start their work. I guess that's my general question. I guess too, I want to make a comment about, you know, as informative as this report is, I think it also has to be recognized that there are some serious gaps. There are serious gaps in the report because 3 of the key players on that day did not participate. So the former CAO did not participate, the former director of Parks and Rec did not participate, and the former police chief did not participate. So I caution folks to not make this report the be-all, end-all of what happened on that day, because I do think that there are gaps in the reporting, just by virtue of the fact that those 3 key players didn't participate in the process. So if I could just get confirmation on the process from this point on, and whether or not it'll probably be January before this working group is established, those are my questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'm not sure that I can give that confirmation because there is a process to go through and it will involve many people other than me and many people other than those who are sitting at this table. So I think we can go forward on the basis of the motion and not necessarily hope for the best, but expect the best, because there's been many people who are involved in the process thus far who have pledged some allegiance to the outcome of the report and certainly have pledged to make sure that things go better the next time around, not necessarily that we hope for or expect the next time around.
Absolutely. Kathy can fill in the gaps there.
Thank you. So you are correct, assuming the Board of Police Commissioners approves the motions today. The report would then go on to a public council agenda. If it gets approved today, our intent, our hope would be to do that with this council before the municipal election. So we would have a meeting on September 10th next week, in fact, and possibly one October 1st. So we're getting down to the end of council meetings. With respect to when the working group of the Board of Police Commissioners could be established, we do have one Board of Police Commissioners meeting left remaining, I believe, on the books before the election happens. After the election, it will take a few weeks to reconstitute the municipal appointees on the Board of Police Commissioners. So your assumption about probably end of November, I'd say, is correct. And the other thing to note is that we still have a vacancy for the provincial appointee on the Board of Police Commissioners. And just for a plug, anybody who's watching this meeting online, on the provincial appointment to agencies, boards, and commissions website, there's actually a posting there. If anybody is interested in applying on being on HRM's Board of Police Commissioners, it's open right now. And we're hoping that the province, when they get an applicant, will move quickly on helping reconstitute the board. So I would be suggesting that we wait to form the subcommittee until we get the provincial appointee and get the municipal folks reappointed. So it will probably be at the January meeting.
Perfect. Okay. No, that's exactly the information I was looking for. I was just trying to manage expectations for the public to realize that it's going to take some time to get this group established. And the work has already started behind the scenes, but when we get the new board members, then we'll start rolling on that. Thank you very much for the update. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, CAO, and thank you, Commissioner Blackburn. Are there any other questions and comments before I call the question? Commissioner Smith, sure.
Thank you. Just to follow up on that, I'm wondering when it comes to council, not to create work for Mr. Bates over there, but it would be good to have a short presentation. So is that something that we could have arranged for council on the report itself?
Yes, I'm not sure if we would impose that on Josh Bates, but perhaps Josh Bates in
We'll consider
combination
it.
with the Executive Director of Community Safety, Bill Moore, and Max Chauvin, our Director of Homelessness, we might be able to boil it down into at least a summary for council.
Yeah, so that's just a, consideration. It'd be great if we can, I understand it's a big report, so it would be hard to kind of put it in a short presentation, but I think it'd be worthwhile.
If I could, I would also suggest, because it's an independent report, it's not our report, that we would have to check with the authors to make sure they were okay with that, and probably give them the opportunity to review the presentation, or ask them even if they wanted to prepare the summary. So we'll see what we can do to help make it more digestible for council.
Thank you, CAO, and thank you, Commissioner Smith. Any other questions or comments before I call the question? Given the fact that the motions build one on top of the other, my preference would be that they be dealt with as one. But if the spirit moves anybody, they could be dealt with individually. 10.4.1, Board of Police Commissioners Community Survey on Policing. And there is a motion for this one, and there is a speaker. I'm going to put the motion out, and then I'm going to call on the speaker. The motion is that the Board of Police Commissioners for the Halifax Regional Municipality request Regional Council to allocate $25,000 in the board's 2025-2026 budget for the purpose of conducting a monthly independent community survey on policing. Moved by Commissioner Blackburn. Second by Commissioner Smith. Thank you. Our speaker is Mr. Bates, Policing Policy Strategist. Mr. Bates, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Josh Bates, Policing Policy Strategist. As the Vice Chair just outlined, the recommendation before you is to request up to $25,000 from Regional Council for the purpose of conducting an independent community survey on policing in the 25-26 fiscal year. So the survey, if we receive these funds, would consist of up to 25 questions, including core indicators outlined in a national report produced by Public Safety Canada. We would include some demographic questions, and there's also some room for some additional questions based on community feedback. While there will be some policing questions asked in this fall's resident survey, I don't think this should be thought of as a substitute for a standalone survey on policing. First, our community survey policy in our policy manual references an annual survey, whereas the resident survey only takes place every 3 to 4 years. I think it's important that a survey be conducted at least annually to measure trends over time. Second, including other survey questions in a police survey could lead to cross-contamination. So in other words, dissatisfaction in one area could lead to dissatisfaction expressed in another area. And thirdly, the national report states that the core indicators should be the first questions asked in the survey and also in a specific order. And this is just not possible in the resident survey. So the advice we received from a survey expert was to survey a small sample monthly, if possible, rather than an annual survey. And I think, sorry, just one sec. So the quote we received includes the option of a monthly survey, and this is the recommendation that is before you. The last thing that I want to point out is that the CAPG will be hosting a webinar with Chris Jackmantonio on September 23rd regarding police survey. And Chris is a professor at Dalhousie and an expert in this area. And he's actually the expert that the committee met with back in the summer. And I'd encourage you all to attend that webinar. So with that, I'd welcome any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bates. When the expert was recommending a sampling, do we know how big a sample it would be?
So it would be over the course of a year. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but roughly we're looking at around 500-600 a year. So you divide that by 12. So it would be a very small sample every month. And the purpose of doing a monthly survey rather than an annual survey would be to guard against specific events that could impact one's perception of policing. So what immediately comes to mind for me is the murder of George Floyd, right? And while that took place in the United States, that had an impact on the way people perceive police globally. So if you were to go out in the field immediately following that event, that could impact the responses people convey on a survey.
So you're talking about give or take 50 people a month?
Roughly, yes.
And would they be the same people, or would they chosen at random?
They'd be chosen at random. So this would be an online platform. And so people would be invited to fill out these questions on an online platform, and it would be a random sample, different people every month.
Okay, and how would the randomization take place, or is that too granular for the time?
That would be too granular. If we're successful and we have a vendor, then they could answer those questions.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Smith has some questions.
So thank you, Josh, for giving us a quick little brief, because my concern was that monthly piece of it. It just seemed too frequent for survey, and also just for residents, it to me felt that it would be like an oversaturation of getting and giving information related to policing. But when you say you have an experts who give it that feedback and saying that monthly is where it should be, then it's hard to argue with that, especially when there's experts who are giving that feedback. So that was my biggest concern. I felt monthly was too frequent, but I am curious to hopefully attend that it's not a training, it's like an information session related to policing surveys.
Oh, the webinar.
It's a webinar, okay.
Yeah, it's in a couple of weeks, yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I was concerned initially at reading the report and hearing monthly, but understanding, especially the expert that you reference, it's kind of hard to argue that they don't know what they're doing, because I'm pretty sure Jack and Tony don't.
Yeah, I think quarterly would also be okay. And like his recommendation was monthly. So that's, I like you, I would take his advice. Our like I said, our policy does state annual, but I think that there are compelling reasons not to do annually. So I would be comfortable personally with quarterly or monthly.
So that was my amendment before hearing your information, was that we amended to quarterly. But again, I might be the only one that feels that way, and also you've consulted experts, but that was going to be what I wanted to do today, was move to quarterly.
Yeah.
But I'll leave it at that and leave my other colleagues, if they feel the same way, to bring it forward. But other than that, I think it's good.
Thank you, Commissioner Smith. CAO?
Thank you. So would we be going through a procurement process to get a vendor to do their surveying, and then through that process, working with whoever the external service provider is, taking their advice to shape how it's done, when it's done, how frequently?
Yes, that would be my expectation, CAO. If we're successful in procuring these funds, is that we would then go out, find a vendor, and then yes, exactly as you described, then we would shape the survey.
Commissioner Malley.
Mr. Bates, the session that we had with the Dr. Chris Giacomontoni from Dow was very, very worthwhile. We learned a great deal, and the explanation behind eliminating incidences from the biases in the sampling made a great deal of sense. I'm wondering though, when we go out and we procure the services to do this from a firm, they won't necessarily have the expertise specific to surveying policing. And I'm wondering if we have an adequate amount of money in that ask to draw upon the expertise of someone with the knowledge to formulate and then help us interpret those results during this period. So I'm wondering if additional funds should be added to that for some type of, expertise consulting service to ensure it's proposed done right. Not that the surveying company won't know how to do the mechanics of it, but making sure the questions are the right questions, making sure the questions are in the right order, so on and so forth. Welcome your thoughts on that.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Commissioner. And I should have acknowledged the work of Commissioners O'Malley and Blackburn, who were members of the ad hoc committee and met with Chris Giacomontoni and worked with me. So the $25,000 that's recommended, that's based on a high level estimate we received from a vendor, and added a little bit of a cushion there because, costs do tend to go up. But it would be at the discretion of the board if you would like to increase that amount to add a little bit more of a cushion to do perhaps some additional analysis, add some additional questions, or any additional work that you might have in mind. But the amount, like I said, the amount 25,000 would be enough for the survey, and I wouldn't expect that there would be much left over beyond that.
Just thinking a little bit about Commissioner Smith's comments, it does strike me that doing something 4 times as opposed to 12 times would be cheaper. And I think that it would avoid the sort of spikes you would see, given the fact that there seems to be in every month some sort of significant policing event that could attract more attention than it deserve if you're trying to identify trends. So I kind of like the idea of the 4 instead of 12. I think that would be a friendly amendment, but I don't know about the friendliness of suggesting another figure than the $25,000. That seems to be bookended by some expert advice.
Yes, so first question, 4 times a year would be less money than 12. So I think the recommendation is for monthly. I think at the discretion of the board, you can just remove that word, and then we could have further discussions and determine at a later date whether 4 or 12 is the right number. And yeah, and then if you want to increase the number, I would defer to our solicitor. I don't think that would be friendly, but yeah, if the committee wants to ask for 35 rather than 25, that would be an amendment.
Who brought the original motion?
Commissioners Blackburn was the mover, and Commissioner Smith was the seconder.
Mhm. Well, normally when you're adding an additional financial commitment, you wouldn't treat it as simply friendly and go through. But I think if everybody here is on board with an increase, then it could be done that way. You know. So if you want to make your amendment to the motion, it's fine.
I would, unless there's an alternate way, just to procure those types
I
of
think the simplest
services
way-
internally. Or
Well, perhaps the CAO, did you have something to add on?
Yes, you know, I would be less concerned about picking a specific number. We've got to bring this request forward to council as part of the budget process. And, you know, we would have time perhaps between now and then to do more research and figure out what is a reasonable range, just to validate and confirm what the right number is. And then we would feed it into the budget process. The budget to support the Board of Police Commissioners resides within Legal Services, the department that Josh works in. So we can add it into that cost center. So I'm thinking we stick with the wording of the motion of what the Board of Police Commissioners wants funding to accomplish. And then we'll figure out, okay, if we don't think the $25,000 is enough, you know, we can make an adjustment before we bring it forward through the budget process.
Because
makes
the only
sense.
thing I'd add to that too is as the vice chair mentioned, if you go to a quarterly reporting, that in itself is going to save some money that might be available for something else to be decided in the future. So
just to add, I mean, we had Commissioner Blackburn and myself had the benefit of going through a lengthy learning curve and discussion with an expert in the area. And, you know, the reasoning seemed quite sound in terms of doing monthly sampling. And, you know, I support the motion in terms of this ask for the next fiscal year to do a year of monthly sampling and see what the experience is like. And then at the end of that year, if we found that monthly sampling was too frequent, lower it to quarterly.
Can't argue with that logic. Commissioner Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, and certainly I think that was part of the conversations that we had with the doctor. Just, and I think we sort of settled on monthly because since this is our first sort of dip into this pool, we wanted to get as much information as possible up front, and then with the option of sort of backing off to maybe quarterly later on in the process. But, you know, certainly the figure of $25,000 was one that was discussed at the meeting as being a reasonable amount to set aside for a monthly independent survey. So just wanted to bring you that context from the meeting as well. I think what Commissioner O'Malley is suggesting is a sound path forward, and will get us the information that we need. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? The motion as moved and seconded. Call the question. All in favor? Any contrary? Any abstentions? Motion's carried. Thank you, Mr. Bates. Next are in-camera or items that are traditionally dealt with in camera, minutes from in-camera meetings and a personnel matter. Can I have a motion to move in camera?
Vice Chair.
She didn't. Okay. The other thing is.
We can deal with the in-camera minutes in public if you wish.
Sure. Okay. Chief Superintendent.
Vice Chair, may I be able to introduce two of our HRD staff that are here that may be newcomers to the board? Would that be permissible before you go into in-camera?
Yes.
There's some of our folks that have newly arrived and been posted in Gottingen Street. And one is a public complaints expert in terms of dealing when concerns come in from the public, and he's coordinating the number in all of Halifax. And Callie Garnett is the master behind some of the stats document you may see in the report and inferring and helping us understand what the trends are. So I just wanted to acknowledge them because they are key people in behind the machine to support the board with governance. Thank you.
Thank you and welcome, constables.
Do you want to get rid of 13 first, and the police won't have to stay around for going in camera?
Yeah, there's no notice of motion, is there?
Just pass the motion, and then nobody else would have to stay.
There are people who are hanging about for the end of the meeting, and if we could accelerate perhaps a little bit, are there any notices of motion? And so the only other thing will be the date of the next meeting and the adjournment. The next meeting is October 2nd, 2024, and we can't adjourn until we've dealt with the two remaining matters. As for the in-camera minutes, they can be approved without going in camera. So they are the July 24th and the August 7th in-camera minutes. They've been moved by Commissioner Smith. Do we have a seconder? Seconded by Commissioner O'Malley. Are there any questions or comments on the minutes? They've been circulated. Call the question. All in favor of those minutes being adopted? Contrary minded? Abstentions? That motion is carried. Thank you. Next is a personnel matter, which by way of policy and protocol is dealt with in camera. I need somebody to move that we go in camera. Constable Blackburn, sorry, Commissioner Blackburn, you like that?
Sounds good.
And Commissioner O'Malley.
We do have an official, what's your other title?
What's that?
Sergeant Brigadier.
Oh, honorary lieutenant colonel.
There you go.
Oh, look at you.
In the army, though.